Hi everyone, I'm Aaron Potratz.
And I'm Nathan Hawkins. If you don't know us yet, we are the voices behind the Shrink Think podcast, which is part of the Psychcraft network of podcasts.
We are so proud to be a part of this network, along with the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, and the great work he is doing to help people in their journeys.
And if you haven't discovered the Shrink Think podcast, you can find us wherever you listen to your podcast. We'd love for you to join us as we seek to help you with your relationships, your healthcare practices, and your therapy journey.
Join us as we bridge the gap between clients and therapists. And be sure to check us out at shrinkthink.com/podcast and take our free e-course.
And have a great day.
Over 15 years ago, when I started my private practice, I had to learn a lot, and most of it the hard way, and I don't think you need to do the same. Hi, I'm Gordon Brewer, a licensed psychotherapist, and welcome to the Practice of Therapy podcast, part of the Psychcraft network of podcasts. Join me in this journey of discovery as we have conversations with other leaders and professionals in both the mental and allied health fields. Join us as we explore both the business and clinical sides of running a private practice. Everyone, this is episode number 255 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. I'm Gordon Brewer, and glad you're with me. Glad you're joining me in listening to the podcast. I'm looking forward to you hearing from my guest today, Chris McDonald, which, I say that so many times as I'm recording this podcast, not specifically for Chris, but, one of the things I was thinking about with just doing this podcast is the privilege I get to talk to some really fascinating and interesting people. And also just, in many ways, it's almost like mini supervision sessions in that I pick up things from people along the way, particularly both on the business side of things, of learning new ways of doing the business of counseling or being in practice or private practice, but also the clinical side of things. And as I was re-listening to this recording that I did with Chris just a few weeks ago, I realized that with her, and that she was just very affirming for me, and just thinking about some of the things that have been on my mind around doing therapy and doing counseling. Also, if you've listened to the previous two episodes in my conversation with Dr. Cliff Mitchell, that just kind of blew me away as well. But anyway, before I digress too much, I'm really looking forward to you hearing from Chris McDonald and our conversation around running a holistic counseling practice or therapy practice, and what all that means, and what that niche is about. And but before we get to Chris, I'd love for you to find out more about the Practice Launch Club. Now, the Practice Launch Club, I've mentioned it on several episodes, is a cohort or is a membership community of those of you that might be in those beginning stages of starting your practice or scaling your practices. And one of the things that I was reminded of in my conversation with Chris is that the importance of making those connections and really being able to learn from others other than in the traditional way. And so, the Practice Launch Club can offer you that and can give you that. And so I invite you to go over to practiceoftherapy.com/launch club and take a look at that. And I'd love to begin a conversation with you about becoming a member and what all that entails. So be sure and check that out. practiceoftherapy.com/launch club. And also be sure and check out the Psychcraft network. At the beginning of this podcast, you heard heard from one of my fellow members of that network. And we're real excited about the work that we're doing around helping people find meaning in their practices, but also in their lives through our different podcasts and the different things, our different niches within this whole podcasting world. So be sure and check it out. And you can find that by going to psychcraftnetwork.com, and that you'll find out about all the great podcasts that are in this network. And real quickly, before we get to my conversation with Chris, I'd love for you to hear from our sponsor of the podcast, TherapyNotes.
Is your practice running like a well-oiled machine? One of the keys to a successful private practice is having the right systems and processes in place to make things run as smoothly as possible. With a powerful, secure, and streamlined system like TherapyNotes, you'll have more time to spend with what matters most, your clients. TherapyNotes is a complete practice management system with everything you need to manage patient records, schedule appointments, meet with patients remotely, create rich documentation, and bill insurance right at your fingertips. Their streamlined software is accessible wherever and whenever you need it. It's the EHR that Gordon uses in his practice. By using TherapyNotes, your clinical records will be secure with less paperwork, which means you can give a much better quality of care. TherapyNotes integrates all aspects of your practice to help you improve patient care. Be sure and check them out today by going to practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes. And be sure to use the promo code GORDON to get 2 months free.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome again to the podcast. And I'm happy for you to get to know today Chris McDonald. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks. So glad to be here.
But Chris, as I start with everyone, why don't you tell folks a little bit more about yourself and how you've landed where you've landed?
Sure. So I'm a holistic therapist, and kind of that's been a process for me to build my identity with that, and started kind of small with that when I was a school counselor, and started just with breathing practices. But, you know, as things have rolled, and I wasn't even sure that I would land where I landed. It's one of those things that I've gotten lots of different trainings, met lots of different people that kind of took me in this direction of holistic therapy, and got my yoga certification in 2019, which I never in my life imagined I would. So it's one of those things that found myself on this path, which I love. And I started the Holistic Counseling Podcast in 2021 of April. So still building that and building my holistic community with other therapists, which is my passion. I love all things holistic and use a lot of yoga, mindfulness, meditation with clients. I have a small group practice. So I have 2 clinicians that work for me, and they also work with mostly young adults, and that's what I found is more my niche. And I love to work with those just starting out in life from 18 to about 30. So a lot of them in transitions from college, going to college, or going college to work, and learning those adulting tasks. A lot have anxiety, depression, trauma. That's kind of the focus. So
yeah, and it seems like I dare I say post-COVID. I think a lot of that has really come out for people with just that, the depression, anxiety, and all of those things, particularly for that age group.
Sure.
Just,
It's a lot of struggle and a lot of identity issues, and figuring out, trying to find meaning and where am I going with my life, which I love that. And I think it goes back to my school counselor roots, because I love helping people figure out their future, setting goals, identifying meaning, purpose, spirituality, beliefs. And for me, that's a passion.
Yes. And it's much needed. I think, as you know, and I think most of the audience knows, that's we're not the people in our professions are kind of in short supply right now. And so I think most of us are finding that we, if we're marketing in the right way, our practices are getting full pretty quickly.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Things have changed. I feel like the counseling world has changed so much since COVID. And,
Mm-hmm.
it's just a lot of transition to telehealth, and which I think is a good thing. I think we're able to reach more clients, and I'm happy
Mm-hmm.
with some of those changes. My practice
Right.
is all virtual.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
That's good. So we'll talk some more about that and how you've done that. But what one question that I have is when you think of being a holistic counselor, and I'm sure people
Yes.
listening to this are wondering about that and what that means. So tell us kind of what that means to you.
Yeah. So for me, it's treating the whole person, not just the mind or using just CBT approaches. It's mind, body, and spirit, I call it. More of that approach, and really looking at somatic practices. I use a lot of that, combining some of the yoga in sessions, which is more about calming the nervous system, the yoga that I use, and turning on that parasympathetic to help with emotional regulation.
Mm-hmm.
Use bits and pieces of other somatic experiencing, and whatever I can pick up that I think is helpful with clients, as far as somatically based. Also, I mentioned the spiritual piece. So part of my intake is I have a holistic forums I use, and I ask clients if they're comfortable discussing spirituality or religious practices, what they might be. I include holistic practices just so we can have a place to start. So if they are already doing meditation, we'll have a discussion on that, and
Mm-hmm.
just kind of see where that goes from there, and whatever the client wants to talk about as far as spirituality, if they're comfortable with that. And I'm the kind of therapist who's, if you want to talk about contacting your angels, spirit guides, I'm there, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm open to that. And if that's what, of course, what the client wants to discuss, and how to create some kind of spiritual practices, because that's different for everybody. It's not the
Right.
same thing. So
Yeah.
really, yeah, just looking overall, including interventions, like I mentioned, yoga, somatic experiencing, I think is more of a holistic perspective, meditation, essential oils, tarot cards. These are just some that are mentioned on my podcast as well.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Brainspotting, EMDR, we can't forget those.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yes.
So I guess one thing that I'm really curious about when I think about those different modalities, as you, if you will, thinking about yoga
Yes.
and doing somatic work and that kind of thing, how have you been able to do that via telehealth?
Ah, interesting. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, for me, it was an easy transition because I've done video since I started my practice
Mm-hmm.
in 2015. So I was not scrambling because I already had people online, but um, you have to be more conscious of your visual cues and your camera. Like I bought this amazing video camera. One thing I learned was the importance of having good sound quality for your sessions as well as
Mm-hmm.
good video. So the camera I have, if I stand up to do standing yoga, people can see my whole body instead
Mm-hmm.
of the crappy ones that come with the laptop, right? The
Right.
camera. So
Yeah.
really investing in yourself and your practice for sound, and of course lighting, and that's important too.
Mm-hmm.
Really making that a priority. So being able to do that, and having, for yoga, we have a lot of what are called cues. So really being clear on my cues of what I say. And of course, clients don't necessarily have the best camera sometimes, but
Yeah.
so if they're bending down, I can't see what they're doing. I'll be like, tell me what's happening right now. And I'll just
Right.
try to make sure they're, not hurting themselves. And
Yeah.
we figure out where they are. Cause that sometimes is a challenge, because if we're not in
Mm-hmm.
person, I can't always tell. And I tell them that they really have to focus on what my voice is saying in the cues.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think as we all learned again during COVID, we could quickly adapt to
Adapt.
doing,
Yes.
yeah, to doing, you know, sessions in the video format. Personally, I still prefer in person.
Right.
You know, and okay, folks, you can say it. Okay, 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 boomer. But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, but one of the things too, maybe that folks are curious about is as you have built, and I know this is part of what you do with some of
Yes.
your consulting work, is as you built your practice, what have you found as far as what is helpful in building a telehealth only kind of practice?
Well, that's interesting because can I just tell a quick story about that? I was all in person. Like I said, I had some telehealth, a few clients, handful. And then, of course, COVID happened. And I went back to the office in May of 21 part-time for in-person and did a hybrid. And you know what happened? My young adults were not wanting to come in.
Interesting. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, a lot of them were long-term. I see people longer term, especially with trauma. And a lot of them were, or they would be like, oh, I'll come in video this week or come in person this week and video next week. And I'm just like, I don't have enough people to sustain keeping my in-person office. So March this year, I closed it and just went all video because I didn't have enough people coming in, honestly.
Wow.
Because I really thought there was a point, oh man, people are going to want to be coming in. No, I think people got used to it, the convenience of it. But yeah, like I said, just having those systems for being careful with payment, I think is important in private practice for virtual, because I don't have the option for you to give me a cash copay. So I make sure my electronic health record, everything, all forms are filled out. Because that was the thing when I had in person, you can just throw a form at them if they didn't fill out something and it's fine. Can't do that with video. So making sure I have those systems with making sure the credit card's in the system. And for my clinicians who work for me, that's something that I always talk to them about, making sure everything is set. So we don't have to be chasing down money.
Right.
That's the other piece. I think that is really important. And figuring out which platform to use. I use that HIPAA Zoom. That's where I ended up. But I also have TherapyNotes as a backup for another telehealth. So, so having a backup is essential.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's been my experience too with folks. You know, what's interesting is that I think there are a lot of folks, especially depending on when you have your, you know, what you have set your schedule to.
Yes.
There are a lot of folks that saving that commute time to come to an appointment and then go back to their office or wherever they might be, doing it telehealth is much more convenient for them. And so I found that a lot of my clients that had been doing kind of, like you said, kind of hybrid things are gravitating more towards the telehealth. Yeah.
Yep. And I see lots of people, and I'm being flexible. I see people in their cars, which is totally fine on their phone. We can't do standing stuff for movement, but that's okay. You know, just for us to have that flexible mindset with this.
Right. Yeah. So what, as you have with your podcast, tell folks a little bit about some of the things that you've been focusing on and kind of the topics that you hit there.
Yeah. So a number of things. So I can't remember exact, but I think it's 80 something I'm at recording now. I lost track. So it's been a lot, right? Been a lot of consistent. I have weekly episodes that come out. And really my whole goal is to build more of a holistic community of therapists, because a lot of us feel isolated, me included, because where I live, and you probably know this from North Carolina, that it's not the most progressive as far as holistic things, depending on where you live, but where I live, it's not. So it was harder for me at the time when I started this, to connect and find people that, you know, did the same kind of practices that I do, that treated holistically, which is a little bit different than traditional therapy. So finding that network, building that network, which has been amazing, because I have a Facebook group, the Holistic Counseling and Self-Care group, that connects people from all over the world.
Wow.
That are holistic therapists, and we can ask questions and offer support, which has just been totally invaluable. And the podcast talks about lots of different holistic strategies. And honestly, there are so many I've never heard of. I'm like, wow, this is amazing. Really opening up people's eyes to different resources. And that's what I get from listeners a lot. They're very excited to see what's next and what else they can learn. Because my listeners are they very much want to learn as much as possible, and are very fascinated by all things related to holistic counseling and things outside the box. And as well as we focus on self-care practices as well, and some practice building tips too. Right.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I know over this past year that has been, again, on my radar a lot, is just this whole notion of self-care as a therapist. I think absolutely one of the things for folks that it'd be interesting to do a study on this, but for those of those folks that are familiar with the Enneagram, I think a lot of us kind of fall into that Enneagram 2 category, the helper. And one of the things about those of us that are 2 on the Enneagrams, we really have a difficult time sometimes just getting in touch with our own needs because we're so focused on other people's needs. And so, that's one of the things that I've had to work on with my therapist. And
yes.
Yeah. And so just how I can better care for myself. And so,
and I think that's a natural response for a lot of us in our field, want to help take care of others. And of course that can happen personally, not just professionally. And then we get lost in the mix and, and sometimes we self-sabotage our own self-care. Oh, let me take another client. Oh, let me add this one more thing to my schedule. We all know this, right?
Yeah.
And do this. So that's why I create a holistic webinar series for therapists too, that I'm actually doing this week. I have one on holistic self-care boundaries for therapists, because we got to set some boundaries for self-care.
Yeah.
In order to keep consistent practice,
Right. You want to say more about that? Because I think that's a real important thing for people to pay attention to.
Yeah, from a holistic framework too, I'm going to be diving into physical boundaries, like taking care of your own physical needs, right? Because of course that, especially when we get busy, what happens? We stop exercising, we stop eating, right? So how do you make some steps so that you can have a consistent practice? Also, looking at how do we take care of our own mental health and negative thoughts I know that we all can come up with. And as a therapist, right, we can get down on ourselves. We can have that self-doubt. And how do we manage that? Energetic boundaries is not talked about enough with therapists. How do we disconnect energetically from clients? Because you've probably had this experience where you have a client who's severely dysregulated. Then guess what? You might feel that after. I know for me, vibrationally, I sometimes, if somebody's severely depressed, it catches on to me and attaches, and I feel depressed. And I'm not usually a depressed person, and that's my sign. I need to release this energy, let it go. How do I do that? Need to find some strategy. So that's one thing that I talk a lot about with therapists is energetically disconnecting and protecting yourself, shielding yourself. And you don't hear much about this anywhere for therapists. So I feel like it's so important.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've had a few guests here on the past episodes that we talked about vicarious trauma, and I know a lot of us do trauma work, and I think one of the things that we don't get taught in school is how to take care of ourselves when we're affected by, as you put it, other people's energy and the heaviness of what they hand to us.
And what are those signs that you might be experiencing vicarious trauma? I know it's happened to most everybody, that especially if you treat trauma, it's going to happen to you. And what are those signs and how can you overcome that? I mean, that's key.
Yeah. Yeah. So walk us through, maybe if you don't mind sharing this, walk us through kind of some of the routines and rituals you do for your own self-care.
I start my day usually with some yoga, some meditation, and usually I like to do some reading, because reading for me just kind of centers me, calms me down. Now, I don't get to those every day. I'm not going to say that I always have time, but that's my intention. So the majority of days I do that. I usually like some kind of movement in the morning. It just kind of gets me going and helps me get centered. Having some kind of intention for my day. So especially if I've been feeling stressed, what is my intention? That's kind of a yoga practice too, to say, to work through my day with ease, as an example, or have some other kind of mantra. Being able to not rush. I'm a type A. So I have to really monitor that, especially as I manage multiple things with my private practice, group practice, and manage a podcast. So easily I can be caught up. Like this morning, I was like, oh my God, I didn't realize I had all these things going on. And I thought the day was going to start quieter, but it didn't. So I'm like, okay, breathe. Let's take it one step at a time. It's easy for me to go off in that go, and not take breaks. So sometimes my intention, let me just see when I'm going to take breaks. Because otherwise, I don't. And also disconnection at the end of the day. I talk to therapists a lot about that too, because if we don't, it's easy to be like, especially work from home. I had this problem, and once I started all telehealth, I'm like, okay, let me just send one more email then.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Or let me just, do one more thing to finish this note. So finding a time, what is your disconnection time?
Mm-hmm.
And once I'm done, I actually have this attachable camera. I'll take the camera down and say, my work is done today. So saying it out loud, it sounds weird, but it really does help.
Right.
And I have this office at home and shut my door. Those small little rituals, I think, can be helpful.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And I think that's one of the things that has been just some, as I like to say, there are certain spaces that I kind of hold kind of sacred and protect for myself.
Yes.
And one of those is like you mentioned, the morning routine. I mean, pretty much every morning I'm out for a run or a walk and listening to podcasts and music and that kind of thing as a way to kind of prepare me for the day. And it's it's so funny that you mentioned just thinking about your day with it. As we're recording this, it's a Monday. And so at the beginning of the day today, I was just started thinking, okay, what have I got for this week? And then, and then just kind of get overwhelmed with that.
Easily.
And just like thinking,
Mondays are hard.
Yeah, having to think about all that. But I think having a ritual that that kind of helps you ground yourself, I think is really important. And people, the other thing too, because I get excited about this stuff. Sorry, Chris, but
me too.
This is one of the things too that I've got my planner that I use, and it's one of the things that's in my planner. It's the Full Focus Planner by Michael Hyatt and Company. But one of the things that it has for each week is a weekly preview. And so look back at your previous week and talk about your wins, as they say, and then look forward to, okay, what are the key things I want to accomplish this week? And with that, there's only three things there's only space for three things that you can write down for your week. And so
perfect.
that kind of helps limit and keep the boundaries, I think.
Yeah. And I think it's easy to overwhelm ourselves with, well, let me focus on this and this and this. Oh yeah, this. And it's like, but you have 10 things, you can't focus on 10 things. And then it's going to create some dysregulation in yourself too, if you're trying to do too much. And so narrowing it down, that sounds like a good planner.
Yeah, it is. I did. Yeah. I'll put it a shameless plug here. If somebody wants to go to practiceoftherapy.com/full focus planner, you can get an affiliate link. Yeah. It's an affiliate link. So,
I'll have to look at that.
Yeah, but it's a great tool. And I think just really any of those tools like that, you really are intentional about spending time about just reflecting not only on the previous week, but just kind of reflecting forward is a good thing.
Yeah, and taking that time to do that. It's easy to blow that off. Right.
Yeah. And
getting that habit.
And the other thing you mentioned too is, I think, and I'm not as good about this, is having, like you said, a daily shutdown ritual where you have, where you you say to yourself mentally and emotionally and spiritually, okay, full stop. This is the
letting it go.
Yeah.
That's tough in our field, right? Or you get a text, this client reached out.
Yeah, sure.
And we can be available 24/7 if we don't set boundaries. I set boundaries with my clients too. I'm not available for phone calls or texts after 7 p.m. or 6 p.m., whatever the day is. My schedule varies. I'm not available. I'm not going to respond to your email or text before 9 a.m. So I just think being very clear, again, this goes back to self-care boundaries. And I also think in the evening, what I like to do is if I'm making dinner, just put on a podcast or music, something to kind of shift my neurobiologically, my brain to something else. So I'm out of work mode, changing my clothes, whatever it takes to transition. So figuring out what you like to do, what is something that can kind of train your brain out of that.
Right.
Work mode. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's, we've got to all be conscious of that as well. Well, Chris, I want to be respectful of your time. And I know we could spend probably all day talking about.
Yeah, let's keep going.
So, talking about all this. Well, what sort of parting thoughts do you have just around this topic of self-care and holistic counseling and that sort of thing?
Yeah, just be open to new ideas, experimenting, because there's so much more out there than I ever imagined. Like when I started this, I graduated graduate school in 95, aging
Mm-hmm.
myself, but there wasn't talk of holistic counseling. I didn't know anything
Mm-hmm.
about this. And I think just being aware that, maybe there's something you can up level your practice. Because in my experience in talking to other holistic therapists, so it really can help people, especially people who are stuck, who tried traditional therapy and they're just not getting what they want out of it, or
Right.
they're feeling just stuck in some way. It really can be more effective for them. There's certain people I think that it really resonates with. And I think overall people are really moving in that direction. There is more somatically based practices now. I think that makes such a difference. And just be open to learning and experimenting. And
Right. Yeah, I know I've made a shift in that and my thinking about all of that over the last few years of just the importance of being able to teach clients just about the whole somatic experience of particularly trauma or anything that
so
is
impactful.
Yeah, and just and I think it makes a huge difference to people. And the other thing that you bring up there is that I think for a lot of us that have gone, been taught kind of traditionally in the field, I wouldn't necessarily drink the Kool-Aid of thinking you've got to do it in this traditional way.
Right.
I think they're giving yourself permission to take what you know and take what you experience in life, and then applying that in the therapy room or in what you do is okay. And I think we should be doing that.
And to me, it's self-care too. I don't know about you. I've been doing this a long time, but sometimes it's almost a boredom if I don't keep learning and keep trying new things with clients that I can best help them. So just to me, that can be self-care.
Yes.
What is a new direction I could take to maybe best help the clients I serve? But then guess what? We can use those practices on ourselves.
Right.
That's the best thing. Before I started with you, I just doing some of my subtle yoga practices, and it's just amazing to get myself centered, and it leads to your own healing.
Yeah. Yeah. I know with people that I supervise and for licensure and that sort of thing, I tell them, give yourself permission to experiment with some things and try some new things that maybe are outside your comfort zone, and then being able to be, transparent with clients around that as well.
Yep. And that's how we grow, isn't it?
Yeah,
moving out of that comfort zone. And
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, Chris, tell folks how they can get in touch with you and your website and podcast and all that.
My podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, but I have a website too. It's holisticcounselingpodcast.com. My private practice website is pathtohopecounseling.com as well.
Well, Chris, I've really enjoyed our conversation. Hopefully we can do it again soon.
This was fun. Definitely.
Well, big thanks to Chris for being on the podcast. And be sure and check out her website and also her podcast, the Holistic Counseling Podcast, on wherever you listen to your podcasts. And there'll be links here in the show notes, as we mentioned. But I really enjoyed that conversation. And I hope that kind of gets you thinking about maybe some of the ways that you're thinking about your practice, but also the way that you do therapy and the way that you work with people. As we were chatting about there towards the end of our conversation, I've really made a lot of shifts in the way that I approach therapy and the way that I do therapy than maybe the way that I was trained umpteen years ago. But I would encourage you to do the same and just get creative with that and be able to look for ways in which you can reach people in different ways. And I think there's a lot of potential for that in private practice. And needless to say, I'm a big proponent of private practice. But I remember from my days of working in agency work, I had to do therapy in a certain way. And I think when you move into private practice, you've got the freedom to do things the way you want to do them. And I would encourage you to do that. So again, big thanks to Chris McDonald for joining me, and be sure and check out her things. Again, you'll find links here in the show notes and the show summary. Also, speaking of just getting support and just being able to think outside the box and learn new things, I want to invite you again to go over and check out the Practice Launch Club. And this is an exclusive membership community that I'm running. And we meet 2 times a month as a group of the people that are in that on Zoom. And we talk about our practices and maybe some of the we do troubleshooting together, talk about the things that are wins for us. But also we have, for the Practice Launch Club, a resource library, and also some mini courses and webinars that you can take part in by being a member of that exclusive membership. So you can go over to practiceoftherapy.com/launch club and check it out. And I would encourage you to do that. And also big thanks to our sponsor of the podcast, TherapyNotes. They are the leading electronic health record system for mental health providers, and they're who I use in my practice, and absolutely love that tool, and it makes my practice run so much more smoothly than it would if I didn't have it. So anyway, be sure and check it out. You can find out more by going to practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes. And also, speaking of podcasts, how'd you like that poor transition? But anyway, speaking of podcasts, I'm looking forward to you for hearing from my next week's guest. And they are part of the Psychcraft Network, and that is Melissa Thiessen and Karen Dick. And they have the Thrivival 101 podcast, and they're a part of the network. And as I told them when we were doing the recording of the podcast, they have made our network, the Psychcraft Network, truly international. They are up in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and their podcast is really all about how you can do better. We can all do a better job with our self-care, particularly for women that are in private practice, is really kind of how they're focusing, and also kind of some of the unique challenges for women. You know, not to go too far off on a tangent, but one of the things that I know as a therapist is that most of us men that are in therapy practice are really kind of in the minority when it comes to that. I think there are probably, I don't know what the exact statistics, there are many more women in practice than there are men. And that's neither good or bad, but that's just a fact. So anyway, I would love for you to come back and listen to that episode next week. And before we close out, I would really encourage you to subscribe to this podcast and also any of the other podcasts that are on the Psychcraft Network. And you can find out more about the network podcasters at psychcraftnetwork.com. And be sure and check that out. So got a lot of great folks over there as part of the network. So take care, folks. Enjoy your November. It's hard to believe that Thanksgiving is just around the corner, and golly, the Christmas commercials are already starting. The holiday commercials are already starting. So anyway, take care, folks. You've been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, part of the Psychcraft Network of podcasts. You can find out more about the other great podcasts in the network by visiting psychcraftnetwork.com. And if you haven't done so already, please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com and get your free private practice startup guide, along with a lot of other great resources and webinars and free things just by visiting. Also, be sure to follow us wherever you might be listening to your podcasts. This podcast is intended to be educational in purpose and is not intended to give legal, accounting, or counseling advice. If you need a professional, find the right person for that.